You've seen the photos. White walls, blue domes, the most recognizable island on Earth. But here's what the travel brochures leave out. Santorini is sitting inside a caldera, the collapsed remains of a volcanic explosion so massive it supposedly altered the climate of the entire ancient world. Official story, that eruption happened around 1600 years before Christ, roughly 3600 years ago. Now, look at the maps. Because the maps tell a very different story, and so do the people who were actually there. According to mainstream history, the island we call Santorini was once a single landmass called Thera. Around 1642 to 1540 BCE, Mount Thera erupted with a volcanic explosivity index of 6 or 7, one of the largest eruptions in recorded human history. The explosion collapsed the volcano's center, created the iconic caldera, devastated the Minoan civilization on Crete, and scattered islands across the southern Aegean. That's the official version, and it's been taught as settled history for generations. But there's a problem. Actually, several of them. And they don't come from fringe speculation. They come from historical maps archived in institutions like the David Rumsey Map Collection, and from published books and eyewitness accounts dating to the 1680s and 1700s. Primary sources, the kind historians are supposed to rely on. So, let's go through them. Carefully. Quick pause. As always, everything I share here is the best of what I've been able to find and piece together. If something sits differently with what you know, please don't take it personally, and neither will I. Think of me as someone who reads a lot but certainly hasn't read everything. Nothing I present here is the final word. Evidence changes, understanding shifts. I'd far rather be honestly uncertain than confidently wrong. Now, let's continue. The foundation of the official story rests on a simple claim, that the ancient island of Thera eventually became Santorini. But look at this, a text published in 1687, The Travels of Monsieur de Thévenot into the Levant. Chapter 73 opens with a sentence that immediately raises a question. It reads that the Isle of Santorini, whose ancient name was, and I want you to read this carefully, Theracia. Not Thera, Theracia. Now, you might say those names are close enough to be confused, and that would be a reasonable response, except for one thing. The maps show Thera and Theracia as two completely separate islands in two completely different locations in the Aegean. Look at this 1540 map. Thera is there, Theracia is somewhere else entirely. Now look at the 1561 map. Same situation. The 1599 map. The 1618 map. 4 different maps across nearly a century consistently placing Thera and Theracia as distinct islands, not the same landmass, not even close to each other. And here's the reference point that makes this significant. Look at this 1608 depiction of the island of Milos, about 50 miles northwest of Santorini. Cartographers of this era were capable of accurately rendering island shapes. If Milos had a distinctive outline, they drew it correctly. So, when these same cartographers consistently place Thera and Theracia in separate locations, that's not likely to be a drafting error. That's what they were observing. The implication is worth sitting with. If Santorini's ancient name was Theracia, not Thera, then the foundational equation of the entire official narrative, that Thera became Santorini, may need to be revisited. So Thera and Theracia are two different islands. That's the first anomaly. But what the maps show happening between roughly 1648 and 1685 is where this gets genuinely hard to explain. Go through these maps in sequence and watch what happens. In the 1540 through 1618 maps, the Aegean around Santorini is relatively stable. Theracia is consistently placed in roughly the same position. Its neighbors are mapped with reasonable consistency. Then look at the 1648 and 1649 maps. Something has shifted. Thera has moved southeast of Theracia in a way that doesn't match the earlier maps. The configurations are different. By 1650, the positions shift again. And then look at this map dated 1666. But here's the thing, it wasn't published until 1697, 33 years after the year it supposedly depicts. Why would a cartographer sit on a completed map for 3 decades before publishing it? On that map, Thoracia is barely present. Multiple islands that appeared on earlier maps have changed or disappeared. The entire region looks like it's in the middle of reorganizing itself. The 1670 map begins to clarify things. Cartographers appear to be collecting new data and rebuilding their picture of the area. This is also the first map where a direct reference to Saint Irene, the origin of the name Santorini, appears. Now look at the 1685 map. This is when the Santorini group starts to look recognizable. You can see the caldera shape. The general layout begins to resemble what we see today. But here's the detail that stops you cold. In 1685, there are 11 or 12 islands in the Santorini group. Today, there are 5. If the caldera and the island cluster were formed 3,600 years ago, why does a map from just 340 years ago show a completely different number of islands? Either the official timeline has a serious geographical inconsistency, or something was still actively happening to this landmass in the 17th century. The maps don't answer that question, but they do force you to ask it. Maps can be ambiguous, but the written accounts from people who were actually in this region during the 1600s and 1700s are something else entirely. This is where the primary sources come in, and they are extraordinary. The 1687 Thevenot account describes an event that the author says happened about 18 years before his writing. Count back from 1687 and you land around 1668 to 1669. He writes that one Sunday night, an exceeding great noise began in the port of Santorini. It was heard as far away as Chios, 200 miles distant. At first, people in the region assumed it was a naval battle between the Venetian and Turkish fleets, but there were no fleets. What actually happened, and this is from the eyewitness account, was that a fire broke out at the bottom of the sea in the port of Santorini. From morning until night, vast numbers of pumice stones were cast up out of the water. The cracking and noise was described as sounding like cannon fire. And then this detail. All silver in the vicinity, whether locked in chests or simply carried in people's pockets, turned red. At Santorini, at Chios, at Smyrna, the monks reported that all their chalices became red. Then, after some days, when whatever was in the air dissipated, the silver returned to its normal color. What causes silver to turn red and then revert? That's not a rhetorical question. It's a genuine chemical anomaly that the account doesn't explain and that I haven't seen in any mainstream discussion of this region's volcanic history. The pumice covered so much of the Aegean that small vessels couldn't move through it without using poles to push the stones aside. And at the end of this event, a small island, referred to in the text as Theracia, appeared in the harbor. A new island, emerging from the sea, around 1668, in the port of Santorini. Now go back further to a 1685 publication called An Institution of General History, or the History of the World. This book describes a similar event tied to the reign of Pope Gregory II and Emperor Leo III, which places it around 726 AD, during the period of the Byzantine iconoclast controversy. The account describes, and this is the text, a great smoke rising for many days from the bottom of the sea between Thera and Therasia. The smoke thickened until it formed pumice stones that covered not just the surrounding water, but in the text words, almost the entire continent of Asia Minor, the island of Lesbos, and the maritime coasts of Macedonia. And then, in the middle of that smoke, a new island arose from the sea. So we have a 1685 text describing an island-forming event in 726 AD. We have a 1687 eyewitness account describing another event around 1668. And then, documented with even greater precision, we have May 23, 1707. On that date, a new island rose from the bottom of the Bay of Santorini. It was witnessed and recorded by Father Gori, a Jesuit priest who was present. His account was published in the 1712 edition of the Philosophical Transactions. He writes that among the prodigies of nature, perhaps none was more surprising than an island which rose from the bottom of the sea in the harbor of Santorini. That island is now called Nea Kameni. It's still there. You can visit it today. Three separate events, in 726, around 1668, and in 1707, all describing new land emerging from the seafloor in the same bay. This is not a geologically dead region that finished forming 3,600 years ago. This is a place where the ground was still changing within the last few centuries. One more anomaly, and then we'll bring this together. Wikipedia states that the name Santorini was given to the island by the Latin Empire sometime between 1204 and 1261 AD, as a reference to Saint Irene, who died in 304 AD. The first map on which the name Santorini appears that can be found in the historical archive is dated 1655. The first map with a direct reference to Saint Irene is 1670. If the name was assigned in the 13th century, why does it not appear in any surviving map until the 17th? And there's one more passage from the 1687 Thevenot account worth mentioning. In his description of the island's interior, he refers to a hill between two places called Pirgol and Nebrio. On that hill are several chests of marble with covers, pieces of statues, and the walls of the first town that stood there, called Famosa. There are, he writes, 3 statues of a prodigious length lying on the ground. A collector of antiquities reportedly tried and failed to remove them. The same collector found beneath all of this a great many pieces of gold and silver money. A buried town, marble chests, statues too large to move, gold and silver coins beneath the ground. On an island that officially was already reshaped by a catastrophic eruption 3,600 years before anyone was writing about it. Let's put the full picture on the table. A 1687 primary source says Santorini's ancient name was Thoracia, not Thera. Maps from 1540 to 1618 consistently show Thera and Theracia as separate islands in different locations. The map record of the Santorini group is unstable and chaotic through the mid-1600s, with the 1666 map not published until 33 years later. The island group only begins to resemble its modern form around 1685, and even then shows nearly twice as many islands as exist today. Eyewitness accounts from the 1680s describe fire rising from the seafloor in the harbor, pumice covering the Aegean, silver turning red, and a new island forming around 1668. A Jesuit priest documented another island rising from the same harbor floor in 1707, and the name Santorini doesn't appear on any surviving map until 1655, despite officially being given in the 1200s. Now, none of this proves that the official timeline is wrong. Geology is complicated. Maps from this era had real limitations. Names traveled slowly and inconsistently. Volcanic regions can remain active for millennia without that invalidating older events. But here is the honest question these documents raise. If the caldera was formed 3,600 years ago, why does the cartographic record of the 1600s look like it's documenting a region still in the process of forming? Why are islands appearing and disappearing on maps across a period of decades, not millennia? The maps aren't proof of anything, but they are witnesses, and they have been largely ignored in favor of a narrative assembled from a different kind of evidence entirely. What do you make of that? If this raised questions you hadn't thought about before, share it. And there are more videos on this channel that go just as deep.